I really thought I was about to drop it. Hello! So today I'm going to be reviewing Shiver by Junji Ito. It is one of the selected story collections. It includes some of his best work, by a lot of people consider it at least, and I would agree with that statement, honestly. It includes the stories Used Record, Shiver, Fashion Model, Hanging Blimp, Marionette Mansion, Painter, The Long Dream, Honored Ancestors, and Grease, along with a previously unpublished news story, which is Fashion Model Cursed Frame. Also, a really cool thing I will say about this right off the bat is that it also has commentary after each story, which tends to look like this. It's Junji Ito's like original concept sketches and just some notes. Love that they gave us the original Japanese the notes were in and then a translation on this page. I just think it's such a creative thing to do, and I'm totally stealing this from my short story collection that I'm currently working on, is putting commentary and stuff like that and concept ideas afterwards as sort of like a little peek behind the author mind, and I love that they did it for this. And I love that we get to see some of his really early sketches, you know, for these stories. I figured, you know what, I'm gonna go through each of the stories, talk about what I liked, what I didn't like, and yeah, that's gonna be my review. I'm actually gonna start off with just a quick rant on how gorgeous this actual like collection is. First of all, this blue color, I don't know why it sticks out so much to me, but it is just such a pleasing color, which is funny because it's in contrast to the horrific images that are on the cover. Each of these images, of course, matches up with a story, or in a couple cases, it has combined story elements, but it's really cool because it's all in color, which in some ways makes it more gross, in some ways makes it look more cartoony, so it's less gross. My mind honestly doesn't know how to feel, but I can tell you, I love it. Just look at how good this little, I don't know why, but this is just like almost funny to me. So I'll read the back. It says, including 9 of Junji Ito's best short stories as selected by the author himself and presented with accompanying notes and commentary. An arm peppered with tiny holes dangles from a sick girl's window. After an idol hangs herself, balloons bearing the faces of their destined victims appear in the sky. An amateur film crew hires an extremely individualistic fashion model and faces a real bloody ending. An offering of 9 fresh nightmares for the delectation of horror fans by Viz Media. Let's start off with Used Record. Used Record is one of the ones that honestly starts off kind of slow and you're like, is this scary? Like, come on. So it features a girl who gets obsessed with this record that her friend has, and it's just like this weird record of somebody singing, but like at the end, I think it's supposed to be like jazz or scat or something like that. Scat the word? I don't remember. Anyway, and she ends up, because she's so obsessed with this record, she ends up killing her friend in order to take it from him. And it, oh yeah, spoilers for this entire book, by the way. It ends up, she plays it like at this shop, and then all the patrons become obsessed with it and they chase her, and it has this really great kind of reveal where it's determined that the woman who created and recorded the record, she died right outside the recording studio, desperately wanted to be recorded, so they brought her in, but she died, and then like sound came out of her body and they recorded that, and this is like the one special thing. So it's like music from the afterlife, right? It has the same sort of creep factor as Deserter and a lot of Junji Ito's other stories, where you're kind of left to infer what happens next, and you kind of know whatever happens next is going to be scary and horrifying. So it ends, of course, with the guy, you know, hiding behind a wall, being able to hear the melody of the person he's killed to get a hold of this record. But you don't actually see anything else happen, right? And a lot of his work, short stories especially, sort of end like that, where we're left to infer the real horrific things that happen. I don't feel like Used Record is the best example of this. It is definitely a place where he does it, but I don't think it is the most effective use of it. although I do really like Used Record, it is probably what I think of as one of the weakest stories in this entire collection, which it's interesting because it was very much picked as not just the story for what he considers some of his best work, but the first story. And generally with things like short story collections or anthologies done by one author who want to hook people, and so you put, you know, one of the best stories at the front and you put the weakest stories kind of in the middle, and then you put the best stories at the end. And what that does is so that it hooks people at the beginning, and then when people think about it, they think about the last couple stories because that is the most fresh in their mind. That being said, Shiver and Fashion Model, which are, you know, the other two like sort of front-ended stories, are really, really strong. But it's interesting to me that Used Record also kind of falls into that for him. Not that I have an issue with it, because it is good. It's just when I think of, you know, his best work, there are things that I think could have taken Used Record's spot. So Shiver, anybody that doesn't like holes in things, this is not for you. Shiver is creepy. It has a bit of a weird plot point to it about like how these bugs and these holes appear, but what we end up with at the end of the day is very, very gross, creepy imagery by the end, and I'm very, very here for it. You know, like this panel, like I still think about a lot. It's very haunting, right? Like his eyes like drooping down, like it's so well done. The story matters less in this one than the visuals, I think. I really think this is some of his strongest body horror work, at least as far as not totally warping things, right? This is still kind of a person, and I think that's what makes it even creepier, right? The next story is Fashion Model. Fashion Model has some really, really striking imagery to it. I don't really consider it body horror in the way I typically think of body horror, but the sort of weird proportions of the fashion model and the things that happen and some of the just visceral feel you have from some of the later panels, I think really lend themselves to a body horror-esque thing while it's still not quite being that. It follows these guys that are making a film, and they end up having this one professional model in it who is terrifying and creepy and like wants to be filmed and will kill people in order to be filmed. So like this is what she looks like in like professional publications, and the one guy's kind of like, oh, this face is haunting me, how did she become a model? And then by the end, of course, you have this kind of thing where she's visceral and bloody, and it's just creepy, and it's the proportions are just off enough that you feel uncomfortable. You feel like this is something unknown that I am staring at on the page, right? She's not quite human, and I think that really adds to the creepiness factor. So I really, really like this story. Next we get into Hanging Blimp, which I believe is one people reference a lot online. After an idol like hangs herself, people's faces appear in the skies, these gigantic balloons, and they start going after the people whose face they are to like hang them, and it ends up being just really terrifying. The end reveal is horrifically depressing, and once again has a really good feel of this sort of implied terror, what's going to happen next, except the story's done, we don't know, but we can infer that our main character here probably dies based on everything else, right? And it really has a good feeling of the crushing despair that comes with this concept. There's no escaping these creatures. You can't stay in your house forever. People were not prepped for a doomsday scenario like this where you have to stay in the house. And there seems to be no way to trick these things for longer than a few minutes. And it's just this overwhelming, crushing despair and futility of everything these people are trying to do. And what ends up happening is exactly what you'd expect. There's nobody left. And it's interesting to think of, okay, it happened in this one town. Is it going to spread? You have so many questions by the end that go beyond just what happens to our protagonist. And it's honestly probably one of my favorite stories in this entire collection. The next story on the list is Marionette Mansion. I don't like marionettes. I think they're kind of creepy. So this like has its own, you know, creep factor for me. I love the sort of character build-up for this. Basically, what ends up happening is this guy's brother ends up revealing that he has his house staff like controlling him and his family by like marionette strings in the roofs, but then there's like a creepy marionette that comes to life and sort of takes over, and it's just an absolute bloodbath. But like bloodbath in the sense that they all turn into marionettes and then everyone dies. But it's good and creepy and has really good like suspense, I guess is maybe the word for it. There's a lot of tension, no pun intended, and actually pun definitely intended. There's a lot of tension to it. I think it's good. I don't think it's one of the stronger ones, but I do think it's good. I enjoyed it, and because I find marionettes creepy, it gets me a little more than maybe it would get certain other people. Painter is the next one up, and it is actually a Tomie story. Anyone that's familiar with Junji Ito's work, Tomie is probably familiar enough with exactly how this is going. There is a painter who wants to paint Tomie, and it goes about as well as every other thing that happens with her. It's good, it's interesting. As somebody that hasn't actually read Tomie yet, I have enough knowledge to know about what's going on with Tomie. It's very gross sort of body horror, but it's not particularly scary. But I don't think it's necessarily meant to be, but it is gross. The next story is The Long Dream. This is another one that I'm actually having to kind of remind myself what it's about. It's about people that basically just continue to dream and sort of turn into really gross, weird body horror things. It's good, it's creepy. Honestly, there's not as much to it. There's some stuff about like experimentation, I think, and you know, it's interesting. Once again, this is generally the way you do selected story books like this, which is the strongest ones are at the front and the back. And it's interesting because I think there's nothing wrong with these stories. I don't know how you'd necessarily fix them. I don't know if they need to be fixed. They're just not quite as creepy in their horror, right? They don't quite impact the same way that some of his other work does, or at least have, you know, an impact on me. And I think it maybe makes sense as to why a couple of the ones in the middle I'm kind of like, they're good, but I don't really want to talk about them because I don't find them nearly as exciting as I find some of the other stories, right? Honored Ancestors is the next story. Honestly, the most notable thing about this story is sort of the end sequence, about a guy whose family slowly sticks their head on each other as they die, and so you get this panel. And this panel is the point where things just go off the rails and this creature like slides around, and the body horror is there, the creep factor is there. It's gross and visceral and terrifying, and I think in this book especially, some of his strongest illustration work as far as just how creeped out I feel about it. Like, each of these little lines is like hair off the temples, and it's just gross, and I'm here for it. The last story that's not like the unreleased bonus chapter thing is Greased, which I think a lot of people know as one of his just straight up grossest works. It involves eating people, it involves a lot of grease, and it involves one of the grossest panels that exists. To be very, very clear, very little of Junji Ito's work sticks with me in a way that, you know, makes me scared to go to sleep or makes me actually feel physically ill. I don't know why, I just don't react that way. I find myself really enjoying his stuff, but very few things actually really get me. Fair warning, this is gross. This panel honestly makes me like gag. Like, I don't like looking at it. I just, ugh. Nope, don't like. Which I think is what makes Greased such an effective story, is that is disgusting and I don't want to see it, but also you can't look away because it is so detailed. He's such a great artist that you look at it and you go, ugh, but also, like, it's so good. You want to appreciate the art, but also, oh my god, is it gross. The final story is just a very small, unreleased, chapter that is Fashion Model Cursed Frame, which is that one there, which I hate the teeth in the background, don't like that. And it's literally just a tiny little bit about the fashion model killing another girl, and it's just gross, and I'm here for it as like a one final punch, like, hey, look at how scary this fashion model is. I like the collection closing with that. So yeah. That is Shiver by Junji Ito. It is a great collection. I highly recommend it. I really think, and I said this in my June reading wrap-up video, but I do really think that Shiver is the best introduction for his works. It has some of his strongest short stories. It also gives you a really good idea of the kind of body horror and grotesque visual imagery that exists within his work. I think during the Uzumaki review I recommended Uzumaki as a really good introduction to his work. I stand by that statement, but I do think that there is something to be said for dipping your toe in the water with a couple short stories before diving into a book this large that, while it has some great moments, payoff really comes at the end. You really have to stick it out. And not that there's anything like slow or not great about it, but I do think kind of dipping your toe in with his work with Shiver is a really cool thing to do, and is maybe a better introduction in some ways. If you already know you like horror, start with Uzumaki. If you're not sure, maybe start with Shiver. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. I would love to know how people feel about Shiver, how they feel about the story selection. Do you agree or disagree with me on Used Record being an odd choice for the first story? Let me know. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.